A man vanished from a moving train somewhere between Scotland and England. 4 respectable passengers swore he was never there.
The conductor's manifest showed no record of him. Everyone told me I was crazy, but they didn't know I found his diary. My name is Margaret Blackwood, and this is how I caught 4 murderers who almost committed the perfect crime.
The Midnight Express carried 12 first-class passengers when we departed Waverley Station at 11 o'clock. When we arrived at King's Cross the following morning at 6:30, there were only 11. A man had vanished somewhere between Scotland and England, and I was the only person who seemed to remember he'd existed at all. What followed was the most unsettling investigation of my career, because how do you prove a murder happened when everyone insists the victim was never there? When 4 respectable people swear you're mistaken? When even the conductor's passenger list shows no record of him? This is the story of the man who disappeared from a moving train and the conspiracy of silence that nearly let his killers escape justice. Let me take you back to that cold January night. I'd been summoned to London by my publisher. My translations of Ovid had attracted some minor attention, and they wished to discuss a new project. I preferred day travel, but the only available first-class ticket was on the overnight express. I boarded at Waverley Station at 11:15. The platform was bustling despite the late hour. Businessmen, families, couples saying lengthy goodbyes. The night was bitterly cold, with frost already forming on the carriage windows. First class consisted of a single corridor carriage with 6 private compartments, each seating 4 passengers. The conductor, an efficient man named Mr. Peters, showed me to compartment C. "You'll be sharing with Mrs. Henrietta Walsh," he said, respectable widow, traveling to visit her daughter in London. Mrs. Walsh was already settled, a woman of about 55, dressed in expensive morning clothes, with sharp eyes and a pinched mouth. She nodded politely, but didn't seem inclined to conversation, which suited me perfectly. I had student essays to mark. At 11:05, as the train prepared to depart, I stepped into the corridor to stretch my legs. That's when I saw him for the first time. He stood at the window of compartment E, just 2 doors down from mine. A gentleman of about 40 years, well-dressed in a dark traveling suit, with auburn hair and a distinctive scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. He was staring out at the platform, with an expression I can only describe as haunted, fearful almost. As I watched, he glanced down the corridor, saw me looking, and immediately stepped back from the window, disappearing into his compartment. The whistle blew. The train lurched forward. We were off. I returned to my compartment and settled in with my essays. Mrs. Walsh had already closed her eyes, apparently sleeping. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails filled the silence. At midnight, I decided to visit the dining car for tea. The corridor was dimly lit, swaying with the train's movement. As I passed compartment E, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Inside, I glimpsed the auburn-haired man sitting alone, writing furiously in a small notebook. His hand was shaking. I continued to the dining car, a luxurious space with mahogany paneling and brass fixtures. Only 3 other passengers were there, a young couple sharing wine in the corner, and an older gentleman reading the Times while smoking a pipe. I ordered tea and sat by the window, watching the dark Scottish countryside roll past. We'd be crossing into England around 2 in the morning, reaching London by dawn. At midnight, the auburn-haired man entered the dining car. He looked worse than before, pale, sweating despite the cold. He ordered whiskey with a trembling hand and sat 3 tables away from me, his back to the wall, constantly glancing at the door as if expecting someone. I'm not usually forward, but something about his obvious distress compelled me to speak. "Forgive me, sir, but you seem unwell. Can I help?"
He looked at me with startled eyes. For a moment, I thought he might confide in me, but then his expression closed off. "I'm quite well, madam, thank you." He downed his whiskey in one gulp, stood abruptly, and left the dining car. I finished my tea and returned to my compartment around 1 o'clock. Mrs. Walsh was still sleeping, or pretending to sleep. I marked 2 more essays, then dozed off myself around 1:30. I woke with a start at 3 o'clock. The train had stopped at a small station. I glimpsed a sign reading Carlisle through the frosted window. We were in England now. In the corridor, I heard voices, low, urgent, angry. I cracked open my compartment door. 4 people stood in the corridor outside compartment E, a distinguished gentleman of about 60 with silver hair, a younger man of perhaps 30 with cold blue eyes, an elegant woman of 40 wearing expensive furs, and a stocky man with the rough hands of a laborer. They were speaking in hushed tones, but I caught fragments. Can't let him reach London. He knows everything. Should never have let him board. The train lurched forward again. The 4 people dispersed quickly to their own compartments. I waited a moment, then stepped into the corridor. Compartment E's door was now firmly closed. I returned to my compartment, deeply unsettled. Something was very wrong. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion overtook me. I fell into fitful sleep around 4 o'clock. When I woke again, gray dawn light was filtering through the windows. We were approaching London. The countryside had given way to industrial sprawl and rows of terraced houses. Mrs. Walsh was already awake, tidying her belongings. "We'll arrive in 20 minutes," she said briskly. I stepped into the corridor to stretch. Other passengers were emerging from their compartments, collecting luggage, preparing to disembark. And that's when I noticed. Compartment E's door stood open. The compartment was empty, completely empty. No luggage, no belongings, no sign anyone had occupied it. The auburn-haired man was gone. I found Conductor Peters near the front of the carriage, checking his watch. "Excuse me," I said. "The gentleman in compartment E, where has he gone?" Peters looked at me blankly. "Compartment E, madam?" "Yes, the man with auburn hair and a facial scar. He was traveling alone." Peters pulled out his passenger manifest and ran his finger down the list. "Compartment E has been empty this entire journey, Miss Blackwood. No one booked that space." "That's impossible. I saw him multiple times. He was in the dining car at midnight. "I'm sorry, madam, but you must be mistaken. I've been conductor on this line for 15 years. I know every passenger who boards. There was no gentleman matching that description." "But I spoke to him. He ordered whiskey. Ask the dining car steward." Peter's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Miss Blackwood, perhaps you were dreaming. The overnight journey can be disorienting. Sometimes passengers have very vivid dreams. I was not dreaming." But Peters was already moving away, attending to other passengers as we pulled into King's Cross Station. I stood in the corridor, my mind racing. This made no sense. I'd seen that man clearly, multiple times, in different places. I'd heard his voice, watched him drink whiskey, observed his fear. He'd been real. As passengers began disembarking, I watched them carefully, and I recognized 4 faces immediately. The silver-haired gentleman from the corridor confrontation was stepping down from compartment A. The elegant woman in furs emerged from compartment B. The cold-eyed young man came from compartment D, and the stocky laborer descended from compartment F. All 4 had been standing outside compartment E at 3 in the morning, speaking in urgent whispers about someone who couldn't reach London and knew everything. I approached the silver-haired gentleman as he collected his luggage. "Excuse me, sir, the man in compartment E?" "I beg your pardon?" He looked at me with polite confusion. "The auburn-haired gentleman, you were speaking with him in the corridor at 3 o'clock this morning." His expression remained perfectly neutral. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, madam. I was asleep at 3 o'clock. And as I understand it, compartment E has been vacant the entire journey. That's a lie. I saw you. I saw all four of you standing outside his compartment. Miss, I think you've had a very long night. His tone was kind but dismissive. Perhaps you should rest.
He tipped his hat and walked away, disappearing into the King's Cross crowds. I tried the elegant woman next. Same response. Polite confusion, gentle suggestions that I'd been dreaming, insistence that compartment E had been empty. The cold-eyed young man was more aggressive. Stop bothering passengers with your fantasies, madam. There was no man. You were dreaming. The stocky laborer simply walked away without responding. I stood on the platform as the crowd thinned, feeling as though I'd stepped into madness. 4 people were lying in perfect coordination. The conductor's manifest showed no record. Even the dining car steward, when I finally tracked him down, claimed he'd served no auburn-haired gentleman with whiskey. But I knew what I'd seen.
Then I remembered something. I rushed back to the train before it could be cleaned. Compartment E was still empty, but I searched it thoroughly. And there, wedged between the seat cushion and the wall, I found it. A small leather notebook, the same one I'd seen the auburn-haired man writing in frantically. I opened it with trembling hands. The pages were filled with names, dates, locations, and at the top of the first page, written in urgent script, "If you're reading this, I'm already dead. My name is Henry Blackwell. I am the only witness to what happened in Aberdeen 10 years ago. They've finally found me. I won't survive this journey to London, but the truth must come out. The 4 of them murdered William Ashford on March 15th, 1887, and I saw everything." The entries that followed detailed a killing. A businessman named William Ashford pushed from a cliff during a walking accident that was actually cold-blooded murder. 4 people had been there. 4 people had pushed him. 4 people had sworn to secrecy. And now, 10 years later, the only witness was trying to reach London to give testimony to the police. But he never made it. I looked at the names in the notebook. Sir Charles Pemberton, silver-haired gentleman. Marcus Thorne, cold-eyed young man. Lady Catherine Ashford, elegant woman in furs. William Dunn, stocky laborer. Lady Catherine Ashford, the victim's own wife. I closed the notebook and made my decision. I would take this evidence to the Metropolitan Police immediately. But first, I needed to understand exactly what had happened on that train. Because somewhere between Edinburgh and London, 4 murderers had killed their only witness and made his body disappear so completely that even the official records showed he'd never existed. I went straight to Scotland Yard. It took 2 hours of insisting before I was finally shown to an inspector's office, a weary-looking man named Inspector Davies, who listened to my story with increasing skepticism.
Miss Blackwood, without a body, without any official record of this Mr. Blackwell boarding the train, this is difficult. I have his notebook, his written testimony about a murder 10 years ago. A notebook you found in an allegedly empty compartment. A notebook that could have been planted there, or that you could have written yourself. Why would I fabricate such a thing? I'm not suggesting you're lying, miss, but perhaps you dozed off, had a vivid dream, and found an old notebook left behind from a previous journey. Inspector Davies, 4 people are lying in perfect coordination. That alone should tell you something is wrong. And this notebook details a specific murder. William Ashford, March 15th, 1887, Aberdeen. Surely you can check if such a death occurred. Davies sighed, but made a note. I'll look into it. But, Miss Blackwood, I must tell you, without a body, without witnesses other than yourself, without any official record, there's very little I can do. This man may have simply gotten off at one of the stops during the night. The train only stopped once, at Carlisle, at 3 o'clock. I was awake. I would have heard someone leaving. Perhaps you were more tired than you realized. I left Scotland Yard frustrated but determined. If the police wouldn't help, I'd investigate myself. I spent the next 2 days tracking down information about William Ashford's death. The local Aberdeen papers from March 1887 confirmed it. William Ashford, wealthy shipping merchant, age 45, had died in a tragic hiking accident. He'd fallen from a cliff during a walking party. 4 people had been with him: his wife, Lady Catherine, his business partner, Sir Charles Pemberton, his competitor, Marcus Thorne, and his estate manager, William Dunn. All 4 had given statements. All 4 described it as a terrible accident. Ashford had ventured too close to the edge, the ground had given way, he'd fallen to his death. The inquest had ruled accidental death, no further investigation. But Henry Blackwell's notebook told a different story. He'd been there too, a young surveyor working on mapping the coastal cliffs. He'd witnessed the entire incident from a distance through his surveying equipment, and what he'd seen wasn't an accident. He'd seen 4 people surround William Ashford, seen them argue, seen Ashford try to walk away, seen all 4 of them push him, deliberately, violently, over the edge. Blackwell had been too far away to intervene. By the time he'd climbed down, Ashford was dead, and the 4 murderers were creating their false narrative. Blackwell had been terrified. He was a nobody, a poor surveyor with no social standing. The 4 killers were wealthy, powerful, connected. Who would believe him? So he'd stayed silent, moved away from Aberdeen, changed his name multiple times, tried to forget. But conscience and fear had haunted him for 10 years. Finally, he decided to testify. He'd contacted Scotland Yard, given them enough information to reopen the investigation. They'd arranged for him to travel to London to give formal testimony on January 9th. The 4 murderers had found out, and they'd made sure Henry Blackwell never reached London. But how had they done it? How do you murder someone on a moving train and dispose of the body so completely that it seems he never existed? I returned to King's Cross Station and examined the train schedule carefully. The Midnight Express made one stop, Carlisle, at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning for exactly 10 minutes, just long enough to take on water and change crew. That had to be when they'd done it. I took the next overnight train to Carlisle. This time, I stayed awake the entire journey. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I watched carefully as we pulled into Carlisle Station. The platform was dark, nearly deserted. A few railway workers moved about. The stop was brief, exactly 10 minutes as scheduled. And I noticed something crucial. The track ran alongside a canal. The dark water was perhaps 20 feet from where the train stopped. That was it. They'd killed Henry Blackwell, probably in his compartment during the journey, then waited until the Carlisle stop. In the brief darkness and confusion of the stop, with passengers asleep and minimal crew, they'd carried his body from the train and thrown it into the canal. The body would sink in the dark water, weighted down perhaps with stones or metal. It might never be found. And even if it eventually surfaced, it would be miles from the train, with no connection to the 4 murderers. Then they'd simply denied Blackwell's existence. No body, no passenger record. Peters had clearly been bribed or coerced. No witnesses, except one inconvenient schoolteacher who everyone dismissed as dreaming. Perfect murder. Except they hadn't known about the notebook. Back in London, I knew I needed more than theory. I needed proof. I started with William Dunn, the estate manager, the weakest link in any conspiracy. I found him at a public house in Whitechapel, drinking away his guilt. I didn't introduce myself. I simply sat down across from him and placed Henry Blackwell's notebook on the table. His face went white. "Where did you get that?" "From compartment E. The compartment you all claim was empty." His hand shook as he reached for his ale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mr. Dunn, I know what happened in Aberdeen 10 years ago. I know what you did to William Ashford,
And I know what you did to Henry Blackwell on that train. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can, because you made one mistake. All four of you were so focused on making Blackwell disappear that you forgot about his belongings, his luggage. Where is it, Mr. Dunn? What did you do with his suitcase? Dunn's expression told me everything. They'd forgotten about the luggage. It's still on the train, isn't it? I pressed. Stored in the luggage compartment under a false name. You were supposed to retrieve it, but you panicked, left it there, and now it's sitting in the King's Cross Lost Property Office with his name on the tags inside. I was guessing, but his face confirmed I was right. He had a family, Dunn whispered suddenly. Did you know that? Blackwell had a wife and daughter in Newcastle. We destroyed them too. Then help me make this right. Tell the truth. They'll hang me. You're already living in hell, Mr. Dunn. I can see it in your eyes. The guilt is eating you alive. Do you want to carry this for the rest of your life? He broke down, confessed everything. William Ashford had discovered that his business partner, Pemberton, was embezzling funds. His competitor, Thorne, was bribing port officials. His wife, Catherine, was having an affair with Thorne. And his estate manager, Dunn, was helping Pemberton hide the embezzlement. Ashford threatened to expose them all, to report them to authorities, to divorce Catherine without settlement. The four of them had conspired together, made it look like an accident, and it had worked for 10 years, until Henry Blackwell's conscience brought him out of hiding. When they'd learned Blackwell was traveling to London to testify, they'd all booked tickets on the same train. During the journey, while passengers slept, they'd entered his compartment together. Pemberton had held him down while Thorne strangled him. Catherine had kept watch. Dunn had helped dispose of the body at Carlisle. Then they'd bribed conductor Peters heavily to destroy the passenger record and claim compartment E had been empty. The dining car steward, too. Any railway worker who might have seen anything. It should have been perfect, except for me, the inconvenient Latin teacher who'd noticed too much and refused to be dismissed. With Dunn's confession recorded, I had enough for Scotland Yard to act. Inspector Davies was suddenly much more interested in my dreams. They arrested all four conspirators within hours. But I wanted to face them myself. I requested, and was granted, permission to be present when they were brought together for questioning. The room at Scotland Yard was cold and stark. Sir Charles Pemberton sat with aristocratic disdain. Marcus Thorne radiated controlled fury. Lady Catherine Ashford maintained elegant composure. William Dunn looked broken, defeated. Inspector Davies gestured to me. Miss Blackwood, these four individuals claim you're mistaken, that you dreamed the entire incident. Would you care to respond? I stood and looked at each of them in turn. I didn't dream Henry Blackwood. I saw him, frightened, desperate, trying to reach London to testify against you. I watched him in the dining car at midnight, drinking whiskey with shaking hands. And I heard you four plotting in the corridor at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I found his notebook, his testimony, his proof of what you did 10 years ago. You can't prove we killed anyone on that train, Pemberton said coldly. There's no body. Actually, Inspector Davies interrupted, divers found a body in the Carlisle Canal this morning, weighted down with railway equipment. It's been identified through personal effects as Henry Blackwell. The color drained from all four faces. But even without the body, I continued, your own actions condemn you. Why would four strangers coordinate such elaborate lies? Why bribe railway staff? Why insist so vehemently that a man I clearly described never existed? Because you witnessed his murder, and you were the only loose end they couldn't control. They thought if they all denied his existence, if they removed every official record, If they made me seem like a hysterical woman with dreams and fantasies, no one would believe me. They almost succeeded. But they underestimated two things. I walked closer to them. First, they underestimated Henry Blackwell. He knew he was in danger. He wrote everything down. Names, dates, details of the Aberdeen murder. His notebook is testimony from beyond the grave.
Second, they underestimated me. Because I'm not some silly woman who dreams up murders. I'm a teacher of Latin, a language built on logic, precision, and truth. And I don't give up when powerful people try to gaslight me.
Lady Catherine finally spoke, her voice bitter. My husband was going to destroy us all, ruin our reputations, take our wealth, expose our secrets. We had no choice. You always have a choice, I said quietly. You chose murder. Twice. And now you'll face justice for both. Inspector Davies stood. Sir Charles Pemberton, Marcus Thorne, Lady Catherine Ashford, William Dunn. I am arresting you for the murders of William Ashford in 1887 and Henry Blackwell in 1897. As they were led away in handcuffs, Pemberton looked back at me with cold hatred. You should have stayed in your school, teaching your Latin verbs. Perhaps, I replied, but then 4 murderers would have escaped justice, and Henry Blackwell would have died for nothing.
I returned to Edinburgh 3 days later, to my boarding house, my students, my Latin declensions and Greek conjugations. But something had changed. I'd proven, to myself, to Scotland Yard, to anyone who doubted, that truth matters more than power, that one person noticing, one person refusing to be silenced, can bring down even the most carefully constructed conspiracy. Henry Blackwell's widow and daughter came to London for the trial. I gave them his notebook, his final testimony. They thanked me through tears. The 4 murderers were convicted, all 4 hanged within the year. And conductor Peters lost his position with the railway. Turns out bribery and falsifying records are serious offenses, even for wealthy passengers. Sometimes, late at night in my Edinburgh boarding house, I think about that journey, about the man who vanished from a moving train, about how close they came to getting away with it. I think about all the times we dismiss what we see because powerful people tell us we're mistaken, all the times we doubt our own memories because authority figures insist we're wrong. Henry Blackwell boarded that train knowing he might not survive, but he tried anyway, because truth mattered more than safety. I saw him, I remembered him, and I refused to let them erase him. That's what we owe to the victims, to see them, to remember them, to refuse to let their truths be buried. My name is Margaret Blackwood. I teach Latin in Edinburgh, and I solve impossible crimes. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is simply refuse to forget.